formulate them in the style, like incorporate the question, if that makes sense. So if I'm kind of like, what is da-da-da, you just start.
Okay.
Such is,
so your questions won't be on
yeah,
camera?
we'll edit out the question.
Yeah, obviously there's a gap between him finishing and you starting.
Yeah,
Great. Lovely. Whenever you're ready.
I'll grab my glasses so I can actually read my questions. So I guess we start with the Dazibao and the South Korean movements a little bit. So one of the objects is a Dazibao announcing the death of Lee Han-yeo. Could you sort of expand on the story behind that object a little bit?
Lee Han-yeo became a symbol of the June uprising in 1987. No one was really sure how those protests would go, so there were a number of training events for them, particularly at Yonsei University. And Han-yeo had the misfortune at one of these lead-up protests to be hit in the face with a tear gas canister, and he was carried away by his comrades and went into a coma. And for the whole time, 19 consecutive days of illegal protests involving hundreds of thousands of people, Han-yeol's health status was a major concern of people. So he became a symbol of the movement. And not coincidentally, he was also from Gwangju, where the 1980 uprising had only become recently known in South Korea. So when he died at the end of the protests, his funeral became a gathering of more than 1 million people in downtown Seoul. From there, a bus carrying his remains and dozens of cars drove to Gwangju, where he's buried, in Mangwol-dong Cemetery. And believe it or not, it's a very interesting story because, of course, the police tried to stop the caravan carrying his corpse. But student activists at Cheonnam National University were so well organized, they actually attacked the police lines from the back. And when the police turned around to fight from their rear, the caravan was able to make it to the cemetery, going through downtown Gwangju, where thousands of people gathered to watch the hearse drive by.
That's fantastic. And could you say something, like not a lot of people will know the story of South Korean movements, so what's the kind of significance of the June Democracy Movement, and what's its significance like among other movements in South Asia?
From 1986 to 1992, there was a wave of uprisings in Asia. This Asian wave is unknown. Everybody today talks about the Arab Spring. Yet in 6 years, in 8 places, 9 dictatorships were overthrown in Asia. The June uprising was part and parcel of this. The key event that touched off this wave of uprisings was the 1980 Gwangju uprising. But from there, we had the 1986 uprising in the Philippines, 1987, the June uprising in South Korea, where the military dictatorship was overthrown, 1988 in Burma, where thousands were killed and severe military repression set in for decades thereafter, 89 in Tibet and China, 90 in Nepal, Bangladesh, in 1992 in Thailand. These movements were related to each other very strongly through networks like the Catholic Church, if it existed in the countries that we're talking about, informal networks. Books were brought from country to country by activists. So this wave of uprisings really led to a very vibrant change in the region.
So I'm going to ask you a series of much more kind of general questions about movements, and some of them are a bit kind of, I guess I'm adopting the persona of someone slightly skeptical who's come to the exhibition. That's who some people we're talking to. So some people say you can't change things with protesting and activism. So can people change the world, or where does change come from?
These movements from below often lead to new elites forming, for one dictator being replaced by a democratically elected neoliberal politician that implements very similar policies to what the dictatorships had implemented, but with minor changes. New freedoms are won, and this residue of freedom that uprisings produce are extraordinarily important for humankind's progress. Now, if we look even at classical revolutions like the French Revolution or the American Revolution, if you want to say that, The American Revolution led to the very efficient extermination of Native Americans and of the buffalo, their food supply in the Great Plains. The French Revolution intensified French imperialism in Africa and in Asia. And yet, at the same time, the residue of freedoms that they left, which we celebrate, and rightfully so, are important legacies. Similarly, these movements in the 1980s and 90s have been drawn into the very system they opposed, and yet the residue, the legacy of struggle, the friendships formed, the ways in which people's lives have been changed, the ways in which the conversation has been changed by these movements is extraordinarily important to the future.
That's fantastic. People often report that these moments of social change feel different to their everyday lives. They have a different sort of quality. And is that's what you found in your research? And what does that mean? This kind of.
You know, we often talk about love and sex in ways that are very individualized, compartmentalized, commodified. And yet in these moments where movements emerge, people's ties to each other, the bonds between individual human beings and among groups has an erotic quality to it, not a sexual quality. Sex refers to one part of the body. Eroticism refers to the entire unity of humankind. In these moments, very often, nationalist feelings are replaced by humanistic feelings. Domineering relations are replaced by egalitarian relations. So what these movements produce are a taste of the freedom that can come in a society that's been liberated from some of the structures of domination that seem to be eternal. They're not eternal. Human beings can live differently. And in these moments, we experience those different kinds of realities.
This is a more kind of abstract philosophical. I know where I came up with this. It's what is freedom? Is it just a gift from leaders, or is it something that comes from a law?
When we talk about freedom, very often we think of philosophers who come up with ideas that they pull from various other thinkers from the past. And yet for me, freedom actually exists in these very struggles. In these struggles, people are themselves free. The wonderful inventiveness in this exhibition and some of the objects that you're looking at are an indication of the free thinking and the free making that occurs. These are labors of love. No one is compelling people to make these. No one's saying you must make bombs, or if you're a vegetarian, you should be producing hamburgers. In fact, what these are the products of free thinking people. Similarly, when people go into the streets and their aspirations are for instance, an end to dictatorship in Chile or an end to dictatorship in South Korea, that's the concrete meaning of freedom in history at that moment in time.
I guess the question, why should people be interested in popular movements like these instead of the histories of rulers and leaders? Or in terms of the objects, what's the point of knowing about a protester's mask or their hat instead of a royal crown or a pope's hat?
When we look at history, it's all too often written from the point of view of the victors. That means in many ways that a great man or great woman theory of history predominates. There's more written about, say, Winston Churchill than there are about the peace movements that were really against war of all sorts. This is a tragedy. It's a denigration of the human spirit. Ordinary, common people like you and me have a great desire for peace. We want our children to grow up in a world without violence. Yet world leaders turn to violence without blinking an eye. This is a tragedy. And I think to rewrite history according to which the aspirations and dreams of ordinary people are at the center prepares the ground for a world at peace.
How can someone who hasn't thought about it before begin to look at history from below like this? What would they do, someone coming in?
I would say the first thing to do would be to take part in a protest, to look at some of the issues that stand before us as human beings, and to realize that your life, your activities, what you do in your everyday life have an important outcome on the world as a whole. But more importantly, the alternatives that are offered by the existing system to vote for this politician or that politician are simply not representative of our dreams. If we don't stand up and live for our dreams, we'll never see them realized.
Don't move.
Yep.
Stay
Okay.
exactly where you are.
Yeah, yeah. Should I just carry on? Or are you going to
absolutely,
alter
yeah.
the lighting or something?
No, just gonna.
Oh, I thought I was going to bring somebody to powder my nose.
No, this is great. I've only got a couple more, and then we're good, I think.
I saw you look at me when I said sex, and I was thinking, oh, these little kids. But
No. I
It's-
know where you're coming from. So I think
It's
you
okay.
qualified it just right.
Okay,
it's
good.
It's good. Yeah, actually, maybe just two more. So,
Good to go.
yep. So I guess I get maybe expanding on that, those questions about the feelings. Like many of those involved in, say, US civil rights struggles talked about a freedom high that they got from being involved in activism, or people talk about the role of creativity in these moments. And do you think those are kind of important factors?
at the center of social movements is people's love for each other. And when that occurs in groups, when people have this great love of humanity, such creativity is unleashed. We've seen in instance after instance that social movements can, for instance, adapt new technologies. The fax machine in 1989 China, social media in the Arab Spring, much better than world elites who have paid millions of dollars for the equipment and trainers, and yet ordinary everyday people like us can use these technologies in very interesting ways. Why is that? It has to do with the ways in which the human spirit arises. Instead of being beaten down by the system, channeled into profitable channels, these human basic needs are expressed in ways that are new and so interesting.
And I guess maybe a last kind of quite broad question. What do these moments of rebellion tell us about what life is for, or how we might organize the world in the future?
Very often we are told that we live in a society the way that it is because that's the only way it's possible to have the material goods we have and to live the kinds of lives we have. But moments of protest reveal a very different logic. They tell us that we could live in a far better society at peace, a society where men and women have relationships that are not based on gender domination, a society in which racism is eradicated, a society in which hierarchy doesn't need to exist. These movements today increasingly use direct democracy, consensual decision-making as their form. Yet where are we allowed to have such forms of decision-making in our lives, in our everyday lives? It's only outside the established institutions. So these movements arising from the bottom up give us an indication of the ways in which human beings actually could form new ways of relating to each other.
Great. And then, is there anything else that you'd like to say, or?
Sure. Like no other time in history, all over the world today, people realize that the global structures of economy are a major impediment to the realization of our dreams. At a time when technology means each of us could work 15 hours a week for 15 years and have enough to live, these economic and political structures are dictating that we work longer hours for less money and for more years. The irrational character of the system as it exists is increasingly obvious to people all over the world. And it will take a global movement to make the kinds of changes that would liberate all of us from these enslaving structures.
Fantastic.
Could we have one go at the last question that you were asked
When
by
the,
Gavin? Yeah, because
the
there was
guy
banging
came-
going on.
Oh.
So it was
Yeah.
perfect. It was just that there was.
The last one or the second to the last one?
The second to last.
Well,
So
I think it was second to the last.
Yeah, yours was the last one, wasn't it? Your own
Yeah.
thoughts. So
Right, that was
Gavin's-
okay. Oh, I
yeah,
see.
So-
Sorry, Gavin's last question. Sorry.
You're
I
right.
think I'll wait, because it sounds like.
Should we
he's
shut
coming
that
back.
door, or is it coming through the
It's coming
windows?
through the windows.
Yeah.
Oh, my
It's the back
goodness.
passage. Shall I go and?
Don't worry, I think it's okay actually. Most of the time it's fine. It's just
Okay.
there was a huge.
No, you're
It was
right.
just a
I
huge
heard it
bang.
too, yeah.
Okay. So the question was, what do these moments of rebellion tell us about what life is for, or about how we might organise our lives in the future?
During uprisings and social movements, people come together.
Yeah, it's 10 minutes now, isn't it? The very last
Bastard.
question is...
Try to squeeze it in
Yeah.
quickly.
Let's go again.
When people come together to change the world, their relationships with each other become quite different than those relationships we have in normal everyday life. Structures of hierarchy and domination, questions of nationalism, patriotism, racism, sexism, somehow melt away as people work together in forming new kinds of outlooks on the world. Not to say that these structures exist outside of us, inside of us as well, but at least they become thematized. We can begin to talk about them, and we can begin to forge new kinds of relationships. Within social movements, people often use, increasingly so, direct democracy, consensual decision-making, as for instance in ancient Athens or in New England town meetings in the United States, where people face-to-face make decisions about what's most important to them in their lives. In so doing, people affirm the human spirit, rather than beating it down and saying you must conform to the structures as they exist.
Fantastic.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers, thank you.
Thank you. Good. We squeezed it in.
Yeah.